The champion's shadow, the great arena, stood like a monument carved out of steel and fire. Across the galaxy, it was known as the Hall of Conquest, a place where champions proved their worth and where entire civilizations staked their honor. The lights of 1,000 worlds shone down from massive holoscreens, each broadcasting the event to billions who waited to see blood, glory, and dominance. And at the center of it all stood one figure, a warrior who was no longer just a fighter, but a legend whispered with fear. The alien champion towered above all others, his scales shining under the lights, his eyes burning with a cruel fire. His record was endless. Victories counted not by dozens, but by centuries. No rival had lasted against him. He fought with strength beyond measure, speed that blurred the eyes, and cruelty that delighted the crowd. He had crushed the strongest of reptilian warlords, broken the bones of insectoid gladiators, and humiliated armored beasts twice his size. Every fight ended the same, with the champion's roar echoing as his enemy fell silent forever. To the galaxy, he was more than a warrior. He was proof. Proof that no species could rise against the Council's will. Proof that resistance was useless. Proof that humans, small and fragile, would never belong in the stars. The crowd that filled the arena buzzed with anticipation. Rows upon rows of alien faces leaned forward, eager for the next spectacle. They chanted the champion's name, their voices crashing like thunder. The air trembled with expectation. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Another challenger would step forward, and another life would be broken. In the shadows of the gate, a new figure waited, small compared to the champion, fragile compared to the giants who had fallen before. He was human. The murmurs began the moment his form appeared on the screens. A ripple of laughter swept through the arena. Viewers leaned toward each other, their disbelief sharp and mocking. A human. They said it as if it was a joke. A fragile creature of flesh, soft and breakable, standing against a monster who had never been defeated. The alien announcer's voice boomed across the arena, dragging out the words like a blade being sharpened. Tonight, the great champion faces a challenger from the backwater world of Earth, a species weak in body, clumsy in speed, and foolish in courage. The laughter swelled until the very walls shook. But the human did not laugh. He walked slowly into the ring, the light striking his skin, every movement steady. His frame was lean, nothing like the heavy muscles of his opponent. His fists were wrapped in simple gloves, his eyes calm and unshaken. While the galaxy mocked, he did not bow. His head. He looked directly at the champion, and something cold flickered in his gaze. The champion sneered, lowering himself to meet the small human's eyes. His claws flexed, his teeth gleamed, and his voice rumbled like thunder. "You are nothing," he growled. "When the bell rings, you will not even have time to scream." But the human's face remained calm. The crowd roared with laughter again, their voices united in mockery. They called the human weak. They called him suicidal. Some shouted for the fight to end before it even began, claiming it would be a waste of the champion's time. Others demanded it continue, hungry to see how quickly a human could be broken. Yet still, the human stood. The seconds stretched as the fighters took their places. The alien champion spread his arms wide, basking in the adoration of the crowd. He slammed his fists together, sending a shockwave of sound through the arena. The human simply raised his fists, his stance firm, his eyes never leaving his opponent. For the first time, the crowd noticed his silence. While the champion roared, while the announcers mocked, the human said nothing. He did not answer the insults. He did not bow. He did not break. His silence was not weakness. It was weight. It was tension coiled inside him, hidden and waiting. High above, the great bell hung in place, polished metal gleaming under the lights. It was more than a signal. It was tradition. When the bell rang, the fight began. And when it rang again, it declared victory or death. The air thickened as the moment drew closer. The crowd's voices slowed, the laughter fading into whispers. Even those who mocked began to feel it. Something heavy pressed down on them, something they could not name. It was the way the human stood, the way his eyes did not move, the way his silence held power. The champion shifted, his sneer faltering for the briefest second. He had faced thousands of warriors, but never one who stared at him this way, never one whose calm cut deeper than rage. The referee raised his hand. The arena fell silent. Billions of eyes focused on the ring. The bell was about to strike, and, though the galaxy still believed the human would fall, a shadow of doubt began to creep into their minds. Because sometimes the greatest storm is the one that does not speak until it breaks. The mockery before the bell. The champion stood tall, at the center of the arena, his massive frame lit by the blazing white floodlights above. His scales gleamed as if forged from molten emerald, every muscle carved with years of battle. He rolled his shoulders slowly, savoring the roar of his people, his eyes locked on the human who dared to stand across from him. The human looked small in comparison. His body was lean, nothing like the towering beast in front of him. He carried no armor, no shield, only the gloves that covered his fists. To the galaxy, it seemed laughable. Against claws that had torn through armored hides, what chance did soft leather have? The audience wasted no time in pouring out their mockery. From the stands came jeers that cut like whips. End it in one strike. Snap him in half before the bell even fades. Show the galaxy what humans are made. Of fragile bones and coward's blood. Their laughter echoed like waves, filling every corner of the massive arena. Even the announcers could not hold back their sneers. Their voices rang out over the hollow screens, sharp with contempt. This will be the shortest fight of the champions. Career, one declared, a human. Perhaps they have mistaken this for a ceremony, a sacrifice to honor our champion's glory. But the human did not flinch. He stood still, his breathing slow and measured. His eyes remained locked on the champion, unblinking, unafraid. He did not look at the crowd. He did not answer their laughter. He did not even move when the champion stepped forward, lowering his massive head to glare directly into his face. The champion's voice rumbled deep, a growl that shook the very floor. "Do you feel it, human? Do you feel the weight of all those eyes? They have gathered here to witness your death. You are not a fighter, you are an offering." His lips curled into a cruel smile, sharp teeth gleaming. "I will break you before the bell finishes ringing." The crowd cheered at his words, stamping their feet, slamming their claws, creating a thunder that rolled like a storm across the stadium. They hungered for humiliation, for the swift destruction of the human who dared to think himself equal to their hero. Still, the human said nothing. His silence was heavier than words. His calmness began to press against the nerves of those who mocked him. Some in the audience felt it without admitting it, the unease of seeing a prey animal who did not run. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, but his eyes never left the champion's. The champion snarled, perhaps more to shake his own growing irritation than to frighten his opponent. He slammed his fists together, the sound like two boulders crashing, sending vibrations through the ring. The crowd roared again, their confidence swelling. They believed the human silence was fear. They believed his stillness was weakness. The announcers fed the fire. This is the last breath of Earth's arrogance. They send one of their own to be destroyed, and soon even they will learn humility. Let the galaxy witness what happens when weaklings stand against destiny. Above them all, the great bell waited. Polished and shining, it hung like a judge ready to decide fate. Every fighter in history had waited for its sound, had measured their lives by its echo. For most, it was the sound of doom. For the champion, it was the call to triumph. Now, the moment neared. The referee, a neutral figure chosen by the council, raised his hand for silence. The crowd obeyed, though their whispers and laughter still slithered through the air. The alien champion's chest rose and fell like a beast ready to devour. The day. Humans' breathing slowed even further, each inhale precise, each exhale steady, like the quiet before a storm. The tension thickened. Every being in the arena leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable. Some shouted for the fight to end quickly. Others demanded blood. But all were certain of one thing. The human could not possibly stand against the champion. And yet, there was something in the way he stood, something in the way his body leaned ever so slightly forward, as if ready to explode at the very first sound. His silence no longer looked like fear. His stillness no longer looked like weakness. The champion felt it, even if he refused to admit it. His claws flexed, his muscles tightened, his jaw clenched. Why did this human not tremble? Why did he not show the terror every other challenger had shown before the first strike? The referee's hand dropped. The bell began to swing. The crowd rose to their feet, voices merging into one deafening roar. Every sound in the galaxy seemed to vanish into that single chime. As the hammer struck the metal, the bell rang out, its echo deep and final. The fight had begun. Lightning in human flesh. The bell's echo still trembled in the air when the impossible happened. The crowd had barely drawn their first breath of excitement before the human moved. He did not wait. He did not hesitate. He exploded forward with a speed that broke every expectation. To the alien eyes watching, he became a blur, a streak of motion that their vision could not follow. The first strike landed with the sound of thunder. The human's fist smashed against the champion's jaw, snapping the alien's head to the side. Blood and saliva burst into the air in a spray that glittered under the lights. Gasps erupted from the stands, sharp and disbelieving. Before the champion could even register the first blow, the second landed. The human's fist slammed into his ribs, crushing the air from his chest. The alien's massive body shook, his eyes wide with shock. The third punch came a heartbeat later. This one cracked against his guard, breaking through claws and scale, forcing the champion back a full step. The sound of knuckles against bone echoed louder than the roar of the crowd. The fourth strike landed across his skull, rattling the giant's vision. The world blurred around him. The cheering of his people twisted into confusion, and then came the fifth. The human's fist carved upward in a clean, brutal arc. It connected with the champion's face, lifting his massive body off the ground. For a single staggering moment before he crashed back to the floor of the ring. Blood poured from his mouth, and the lights reflected off his stunned eyes. 5 strikes. 5 blows before the bell's echo had even faded. The arena fell silent. Billions of voices, billions of laughs and sneers, all choked away in an instant. The crowd that had mocked, that had expected to see the human broken within seconds, now stared in frozen disbelief. The human stood in the center of the ring, his fists still raised, his chest rising and falling with calm breaths. He did not gloat, he did not speak, he only stood, ready for more. The champion staggered, his body swaying, his claws scraping the ground as he tried to rise. His pride screamed louder than his pain. Never before had he been struck like this. Never before had he felt his body betray him. His eyes burned with rage, but deep inside that fire something darker grew. Fear. The announcers were silent, their words stolen from their throats. For the first time in the long history of the arena, they had nothing to say. Their champion, their symbol of strength, had been touched not once, but 5 times in the space of a breath. The human adjusted his stance, eyes still locked on the towering alien. His silence was more terrifying than any roar. He looked not like prey, but like a predator waiting for the final strike. The champion shook his head violently, spitting blood to the ground. He let out a roar, forcing his body upright, his muscles trembling as he spread his arms wide. He screamed at the crowd, at the galaxy, at himself. "I am not broken," he thundered, his voice shaking the very walls, but the crowd did not cheer. They remained frozen, their eyes glued to the human who stood calm and ready. The silence was heavier than the roar had ever been. In that silence, the truth spread like fire across every mind. The untouchable champion had been touched. The undefeatable giant had been forced to bleed, and it was a human who had done it. The champion lunged forward, desperate to reclaim his pride. His massive fist swung through the air like a hammer meant to crush steel. But the human slipped aside with the grace of lightning, his movement smooth, his body flowing like water. The punch hit nothing but air. The human answered with a strike, so fast the crowd barely saw it. The champion's head snapped back again. Another blow followed, then another. Each punch carved deeper into his pride, deeper into the lie of his invincibility. The crowd began to murmur, voices low, uncertain, afraid. They had never seen their hero stumble. They had never seen him driven back step by step. And now, before their eyes, he looked small, vulnerable, almost human himself. The council members seated in their golden box leaned forward, their eyes wide with alarm. They whispered among themselves, their voices sharp with panic. If one human could do this, what would happen if more of them stood in the ring? What if Earth had warriors hidden from the galaxy's eyes? The champion roared again, swinging wildly, claws cutting the air. But rage only made him slower. His fury blinded him. The human's calm only grew deeper. With every strike he landed, with every step he forced backward, the truth became clear. The untouchable was now touchable. The undefeatable was now breaking. The human had not just landed 5 blows before the bell finished ringing, he had shattered the very illusion that had held the galaxy in fear for centuries, and the fight had only just begun. The silence of the arena, the great hall, once alive with laughter and thunderous cheers, now stood in a silence so deep it felt like a vacuum. Billions of eyes watched, but not a sound escaped their throats. The mocking voices that had ridiculed the human were gone. The chants that had lifted the champion like a god had vanished. All that remained was the ringing echo of those first strikes, and the image of the champion staggering where no challenger had ever stood him before. The human did not move. He stood with his fists still raised, shoulders square, breathing calm and steady. His face was unreadable, neither proud nor afraid, as though he were carved from stone. His silence weighed heavier than any victory shout. It spread across the arena like a storm cloud, pressing down on every soul who sat frozen in disbelief. The champion shook his head violently, trying to clear the haze. His blood dripped onto the floor in thick red lines, staining the ring that had only known the blood of his enemies, never his own. His hands trembled as he lifted them, claws curling, pride forcing his body to rise again. "I am not beaten," he growled, though his voice carried more desperation than strength. He pounded his chest with one fist, trying to summon the roar of the crowd that had always answered him before. But the silence remained. Even his people could not find their voices. For the first time, they doubted. The human tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on his opponent. That simple gesture, that calm stare, made the champion falter. He saw no fear in those eyes, no weakness, only patience, the kind of patience a predator carries when it knows the prey has already lost. The council members in their golden seats shifted uneasily. They whispered to each other in hurried tones. Some demanded the fight be stopped before the shame grew worse. Others argued that to stop now would prove that their champion was no longer worthy. Their words were sharp, their fear hidden behind political masks. They had believed the champion was untouchable, the symbol of their dominance. Now that symbol was cracking, and with it their control. The champion roared, forcing himself forward. His massive fists swung like falling mountains, aiming to crush the human where he stood. The air whistled with the force of his strikes, but the human moved with a grace that seemed impossible. He slipped beneath the blows, sidestepped the claws, and never once lost his balance. Each dodge was effortless, each motion precise. The crowd gasped as the human countered with another strike, a sharp hook that smashed against the champion's jaw, sending him stumbling again. The silence broke for just a moment with that sound, the sound of flesh meeting flesh, of pride being torn apart. The champion staggered back, clutching his face, his knees threatening to buckle. His chest heaved, his breathing harsh. Rage burned in his eyes, but behind it grew something far more dangerous: doubt. The silence returned, heavier now. Every being in the arena felt it pressing against their skin, their hearts, their very bones. They had come to watch a celebration of dominance. Instead, they were watching the death of a legend. The human stepped forward, slow and steady. He did not rush. He did not waste energy. Each step echoed in the quiet arena like a drumbeat, steady and final. His presence filled the ring, not with noise, but with something stronger, certainty. The champion swung again, desperate, wild, but his movements had lost their sharpness. His fury made him reckless. His claws carved through empty air as the human slipped aside, delivering another strike to the ribs. The sound cracked through the silence, and the champion groaned, stumbling once more. Gasps filled the arena. Not cheers, not laughter, gasps of disbelief, of fear, of realization. The announcers, who had once mocked every breath the human took, sat in frozen shock. Their voices failed them, their words dried up in their throats. For the first time in their careers, they had no script to follow. They had no taunt to offer. The silence became unbearable, and in that silence, the galaxy understood. The champion was no longer the predator. The human was. The council leader gripped the railing of his box, his knuckles pale. "This cannot be allowed," he whispered. But the words carried no weight. Not anymore. The human raised his fists again, his eyes locked on the broken giant before him. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He stood as if this was simply natural, as if he had always known the outcome. The champion, chest heaving, blood dripping, forced himself to rise again. His body swayed, his pride the only thing holding him upright. He looked into the eyes of the human, and for the first time in his long reign, he felt small. The silence of the arena was no longer empty. It was full of fear, full of awe, full of a truth that no one could deny. The legend had fallen, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The end of an era. The champion's knees buckled as he stood trembling in the center of the ring. His claws hung loose, heavy with fatigue, his breath ragged and broken. Blood streaked across his chest, dripping from his mouth, painting the once proud warrior in shame. The lights that had always crowned him with glory now burned against him, showing every weakness he tried to hide. The human stood opposite him, still calm, still steady. His fists were raised, his body poised, his eyes locked onto the giant before him. He had not wasted a single movement. He had not wasted a single word. Every breath was measured, every step precise, and in that stillness lay something more terrifying than violence. It was certainty. The crowd sat frozen, their voices stolen by disbelief. Never had they seen their champion like this. Never had they imagined their god of war on his knees. Their silence was not only shock, but betrayal. They had built their lives on the idea that this monster could not be touched. Now, one human had broken that illusion with fists faster than their eyes could follow. The champion roared, forcing himself to move, to prove he still held power. His legs dragged forward, his claws raised high. His roar was not strength. It was desperation, the cry of a king who knew his crown was falling. He swung with everything he had left, his massive arm cutting the air, but the human slipped aside, smooth as flowing water. The champion's strike landed on nothing, his own weight nearly pulling him to the ground. The human answered with a single sharp punch to the ribs. The sound cracked across the arena. The champion groaned, staggering, his body folding inward. The human did not stop. Another strike landed, this one across the face. Blood sprayed once more, the giant stumbling backward. The third came seconds later, snapping his head aside. Each blow was precise, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of his reign. The champion dropped to one knee. His claws scraped against the floor, desperate to rise again. He lifted his eyes, and for the first time he saw it fully. The end. The human stepped forward, his shadow falling across the broken giant. The silence grew heavier. Every soul in the arena leaned forward, their hearts frozen, their breaths caught. The human raised his fist. The champion tried to rise, but his strength was gone. His pride screamed, but his body betrayed him. The human's fist came down, a single final strike that echoed like thunder slamming into the alien's jaw. The giant collapsed, his body crashing to the ground, unmoving. The bell rang once more. The fight was over. The silence of the arena broke, not into cheers, not into laughter, but into stunned gasps. Entire civilizations watched as the Untouchable fell and a human stood victorious. Billions who had mocked, who had doubted, who had called humanity weak, now stared in awe. Their champion had been destroyed before their eyes, and no excuse could erase what they had seen. The council sat rigid in their seats, their faces pale with fear. They had ruled the galaxy with symbols of power. Now that symbol lay broken at their feet. If one human could do this, what would happen when more of them rose? What if Earth had an army of such fighters? The thought spread like fire through their minds, and with it came the first taste of terror. The human lowered his fists, his breathing calm, his face still steady. He did not raise his arms in victory. He did not shout. He did not need to. His silence spoke louder than any roar. It told the galaxy a truth they could not forget. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had come to claim its place among the stars. The champion's body twitched once, then lay still. The ring that had once been his throne was no longer his. It belonged to the one who had beaten him in 5 strikes before the bell had even finished ringing. The crowd remained hushed, their voices swallowed by awe. Across the galaxy, in every home, on every screen, billions sat frozen as the image burned itself into history. A human standing victorious where no one else had ever stood. The end of an era had come, and the beginning of a new one had just begun.